A lone rancher found a starving Apache woman, unaware she would become his future wife. The sun was setting over the wide, empty plains, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. The wind whispered softly through the dry grass, and the occasional call of a distant bird broke the silence. On this vast land, miles away from the nearest town, a lone rancher worked quietly on his small ranch. His name was Samuel. He had lived here for many years, long enough to know every hill, every tree, and every path along the river. Life on the frontier was not easy, but Samuel had grown used to its challenges. He rose before dawn each day, tending to his animals, repairing fences, and making sure his land stayed in order. It was a lonely life, but he found peace in the rhythm of hard work and in the wide, open sky above him. Samuel's days were often long and quiet. Most of the time, the only sounds he heard were the low mooing of cows, the gentle rustle of the wind, or the creaking of the wooden gate as he opened it to check the pasture. Sometimes, he would see a fox sneaking past the barn or a herd of deer in the distance. Other times, he would simply stand on the porch of his small cabin, a mug of coffee in his hand, staring at the sun setting beyond the hills. He had learned to be content with this solitude. Friends and neighbors were too far away to visit often, and life in the town beyond the river seemed like another world. On this particular evening, Samuel decided to ride along the far edge of his property. A dry creek bed ran through this part of the ranch, and he often checked it to make sure nothing had gone wrong with his fences. The ground was hard and cracked, and the grass was sparse. It was easy to see for miles, but it was also easy for trouble to hide. Samuel's horse, a strong brown mare named Daisy, walked steadily along the path, her hooves kicking up small clouds of dust. Samuel enjoyed these rides. They gave him time to think, to enjoy the quiet, and to notice things he might miss from his cabin. As he reached the creek bed, Samuel noticed something strange. At first he thought it was a large animal, perhaps a coyote or a deer. But as he got closer, he realized it was a person. A woman was lying on the ground, her body thin and weak. She was so still that Samuel worried she might be dead. Her clothes were torn and dirty, and her skin was dusty from the dry land. Her hair was tangled and her face was pale. Samuel's heart raced. He had never seen anyone in this part of the land, and he knew that people rarely traveled here. He carefully dismounted from Daisy, keeping his hands free and his movements slow. The woman's chest rose and fell, but very lightly. She seemed to be barely alive. Samuel knew he had to act quickly. He lifted his voice gently, calling her name, even though he did not know it. "Are you all right? Can you hear me?" There was no answer, only a soft groan. Samuel knelt beside her, feeling the warmth of her body and checking for injuries. She was thin and fragile, and it was clear she had not eaten properly for days. Her lips were cracked, and her eyes, when they opened slightly, were wide with fear. Samuel spoke softly, hoping to calm her. "It's okay. You're safe. Don't be afraid." The woman blinked slowly, trying to understand his words. Samuel did not know her language, and she did not know his, but he could see the trust slowly forming in her eyes, even as fear remained. Carefully, he lifted her into his arms. She was light, almost weightless, and he had to be gentle to avoid hurting her further. Daisy shifted nervously nearby, sensing the tension in the air. Samuel whispered to the horse to stay calm and led her back to the cabin, moving carefully over the uneven ground. The cabin was small but sturdy, made of rough wooden logs. Smoke rose from the chimney, and the faint smell of cooked food hung in the air. Samuel laid the woman on a soft blanket he had prepared. He checked her once more, noticing bruises and scratches along her arms and legs. She had clearly been through a difficult journey. Samuel fetched water in a cup and gently helped her drink. She was too weak to lift the cup herself, but she managed a small sip, and her eyes brightened slightly. Hunger and exhaustion were written all over her face, and Samuel knew he had to act quickly to help her regain strength. Over the next hours, Samuel tended to her carefully. He tore old cloth into small bandages to cover minor cuts and wounds. He heated some water and added a little food, a simple broth of vegetables and meat. The woman ate slowly, as if each bite reminded her of better days. Samuel sat nearby, watching her closely. He did not know her name yet or where she had come from, but he felt a strong sense of responsibility. He had saved her life, and he could not leave her alone in the harsh wilderness. As night fell, the cabin grew quiet. The woman finally fell asleep, exhausted from hunger and travel. Samuel sat in his chair, staring at the fire. He thought about how fragile life could be on the frontier, how one wrong step could lead to death. He also thought about how strange it was that fate had led this woman to his ranch. He did not yet know her story, but he sensed it would be an important one. The next morning, Samuel prepared more food for the woman. She woke slowly, blinking at the sunlight streaming through the cabin window. She looked at Samuel, her expression a mix of fear, curiosity, and gratitude. She spoke softly in a language he did not understand. Samuel shook his head, smiling gently. "It's okay. You don't need to talk, just eat." She nodded slightly and began to eat again, more eagerly this time. Over the following days, Samuel continued to help her recover. He brought fresh water from the well, mended her torn clothing, and showed her where to rest. Though they could not speak the same language, they began to understand each other through gestures and actions. A smile here, a nod there, and slowly trust began to grow. Samuel realized that life on the frontier was not just about survival. It was also about human connection, about helping others even when it was difficult or risky. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills, Samuel and the woman sat outside the cabin. He pointed to the horizon, and she followed his hand with her eyes. He picked up a stick and drew shapes in the dirt, trying to communicate. She watched carefully, then drew her own shapes. It was a small beginning, but it marked the start of understanding between them. Samuel could see the intelligence and resilience in her eyes, and he admired her strength. Despite everything she had been through, she had survived. Samuel also began to think about the dangers that might come from helping her. The tensions between settlers and native tribes were real, and not everyone would understand his choice. But he could not turn her away. He had saved her life, and now it was his responsibility to keep her safe. Every day, he reminded himself that kindness was worth the risk. As weeks passed, the woman grew stronger. She could stand for longer periods and walk short distances around the cabin. Samuel showed her how to help with small chores, like carrying firewood or feeding the animals. They began to work together, side by side, learning from each other. Though they came from very different worlds, a bond was forming. Samuel felt something he had not felt in a long time: hope, companionship, and the beginning of a deep human connection. Life on the ranch remained difficult, but the presence of the woman changed it. The silence was no longer complete. There were now shared tasks, small conversations through gestures, and moments of quiet understanding. Samuel often caught himself smiling when he looked at her, amazed at how someone so fragile could be so strong, so full of life even after everything she had endured. By the end of the first month, it was clear that their lives had changed forever. Samuel had saved her from death, but in doing so, he had also found a new purpose. The woman, once starving and alone, now had shelter, food, and safety. She began to trust him completely, and Samuel realized that his own heart had begun to open again after years of solitude. Together, they faced the challenges of frontier life, each learning from the other, each finding in the other a reason to keep going. Though they had not yet spoken each other's language, and though dangers still loomed in the world outside the ranch, a quiet hope had begun to grow between them. The story of a lone rancher and a starving woman had only just begun, but it was already clear that this chance meeting would change both of their lives forever. Days passed slowly on the ranch, but each day brought small improvements in the woman's health. Samuel had begun to call her Naomi, a simple name he thought might suit her. She did not respond to it at first, but over time she began to recognize the sound of his voice and the gentle way he spoke. Naomi's movements grew stronger, and she could now walk around the cabin without stumbling. Her skin was no longer pale and cracked, and the fire in her eyes seemed to return. Samuel could see that she was beginning to regain not just her body, but her spirit as well. Samuel spent long hours teaching her small chores around the ranch. He showed her how to fetch water from the well, feed the chickens, and carry firewood without hurting herself. Naomi learned quickly, though she often fell while carrying heavy bundles. Samuel would rush to help her, lifting the wood from her arms and placing it carefully on the ground. Each time she fell, she would look at him with wide eyes, afraid she had failed him. Samuel would shake his head, smiling warmly. "It's okay," he would say. "You are learning. You are strong." Though they could not speak the same language, they began to communicate in other ways. Naomi would point to objects, smile, or shake her head. Samuel learned to read her gestures, and she began to understand his. Sometimes they would sit together in the shade of a tree, sharing the silence. They did not need words. Their understanding came through actions, expressions, and quiet moments of trust. Samuel realized that human connection could exist even without speech, and Naomi seemed to feel the same. One morning, Samuel decided to show Naomi the far end of the ranch. The path led to a small stream where the water was clear and cool. Naomi had never seen such a place before, and she stared at it in wonder. She ran her hands through the water, laughing softly at the cool touch. Samuel watched her with a sense of joy he had not felt in years. For a moment, the harshness of frontier life seemed to disappear, replaced by simple, shared happiness. As Naomi grew stronger, she began to help Samuel in more ways. She gathered herbs from the fields to add flavor to meals and helped mend fences. Samuel admired her skill and patience. She moved with care, observing everything around her, learning quickly how to manage life on the ranch. Samuel sometimes wondered where she had learned these skills. They were not common for someone so young and thin, yet Naomi seemed to have a quiet strength that could not be ignored. Despite their growing bond, Samuel was careful to keep Naomi safe. He knew that outsiders might not understand their relationship. Many settlers were wary of native people, and dangers could come without warning. Samuel taught Naomi how to hide in the cabin if strangers approached and how to move quietly through the fields. Naomi listened carefully, learning the routines that would keep her safe. Samuel's concern for her went beyond friendship. He felt responsible for her life, and he knew that protecting her would always be his first priority. One evening, as they sat by the fire, Samuel decided to try to communicate more deeply. He took a notebook and pencil and began drawing pictures of objects on the ranch. He drew a horse, a tree, and a cow, pointing to each as he spoke their names slowly. Naomi watched intently, then picked up a stick and drew in the dirt outside. She drew pictures of her own, simple shapes that represented her home, her family, and the journey that had brought her here. Samuel was amazed. Though they could not speak, they were finding a way to share their stories, their pasts, and their dreams. Through these quiet lessons, Samuel began to understand Naomi's life before she came to the ranch. She had survived attacks and hunger, traveling long distances alone. Her eyes, which once held fear, now reflected wisdom and courage. Samuel felt a growing admiration for her, not just for her survival, but for the way she faced each day with determination. He realized that helping her had changed him as well. He no longer felt the crushing loneliness of the ranch. Naomi's presence brought life, color, and hope into his days. Their routine soon included small, shared tasks that became moments of closeness. Samuel would milk the cows while Naomi cleaned the barn. Sometimes, they would walk together to check the fences or gather firewood. Naomi began to smile more, her laughter a sound Samuel cherished. He would watch her work, amazed at how someone so fragile had grown so strong. In turn, Naomi would glance at Samuel and smile softly, understanding that he cared for her not just as someone he had rescued, but as a friend and companion. However, the frontier was not without danger. One afternoon, while Samuel and Naomi were working in the fields, they saw smoke rising from the distant hills. Samuel's heart raced. He knew that travelers, hunters, or even hostile groups could appear at any time. He motioned for Naomi to stay low and led her to a hidden spot behind a cluster of trees. They watched silently as a group of men passed by in the distance. Samuel held Naomi close, feeling her trembling. He whispered, "It's okay. They do not see us. You are safe." Naomi leaned into him, understanding his words through the tone of his voice rather than their meaning. These moments of danger brought them closer. Naomi began to trust Samuel completely, knowing he would protect her. Samuel, in turn, felt a deep responsibility for her life, realizing that his feelings had changed from simple concern to something more personal. The boundaries between rescuer and rescued were beginning to blur. They were becoming partners, allies in a world that was often harsh and unforgiving. Over time, Samuel also noticed Naomi's curiosity about the world around her. She would watch him cook, study the way he handled the animals, and sometimes mimic his actions. Samuel encouraged her to learn, giving her small tasks that allowed her to grow stronger and more confident. He admired her intelligence and adaptability, realizing that survival on the frontier required not just strength, but wisdom. Naomi possessed both in abundance. Evenings became their favorite time of day. After work was done, they would sit together by the fire, watching the flames dance. Samuel sometimes played a small flute he had owned for years, and Naomi would hum along, creating a quiet music that filled the cabin. Though they did not understand each other's words, their shared moments of music and silence created a bond that was deeper than speech. Samuel realized that companionship could exist without language, built on trust, understanding, and shared experience. One day, Samuel noticed Naomi staring at the distant hills with a faraway look in her eyes. He wondered what memories she carried, what stories her eyes held. He did not press her. Instead, he offered comfort through small gestures, a hand on her shoulder, a gentle smile, a warm blanket. Naomi began to relax, knowing that Samuel respected her past and did not demand explanations she might not be ready to give. Their trust was growing, built on patience and mutual respect. As the weeks turned into a month, Naomi became stronger and more independent. She could fetch water, feed the animals, and even help with small repairs around the cabin. Samuel felt a quiet pride in her growth, amazed at how resilient she was. But he also felt a growing attachment, an awareness that his life had been forever changed by her presence. She had come to him weak and starving, but now she was strong, capable, and full of life. Samuel realized that their connection was more than survival. It was the beginning of something deeper, a bond that neither of them had expected. By the end of part 2, Naomi and Samuel had formed a delicate but strong partnership. They worked together, laughed together, and faced the dangers of the frontier as a team. Though they could not speak each other's language, they had learned to understand each other in ways that words could not capture. Their trust, built on care and shared experience, was growing into something extraordinary. What had begun as an act of mercy and survival was slowly becoming a story of companionship, respect, and the first signs of love. Days turned into weeks, and life on the ranch slowly found a rhythm. Samuel and Naomi had settled into routines that were both practical and comforting. The sun rose and set over the plains, marking time with quiet consistency. Samuel still worked from dawn to dusk, tending to the animals and the fences, but now he had Naomi by his side. She moved with confidence, carrying out chores with steady hands and a focused mind. The small cabin was no longer silent. Laughter, soft humming, and the sounds of daily work filled the space. Despite their progress, there were still many challenges. Naomi had recovered physically, but the scars of her past were visible in the way she sometimes flinched at sudden noises or avoided certain movements. Samuel noticed these moments and responded with gentle patience. He never forced her to speak or explain herself. Instead, he offered comfort through quiet gestures, a hand on her shoulder, a soft smile, or a simple nod of understanding. Naomi began to respond to his care with trust, sometimes leaning slightly against him when she felt anxious or tired. Their communication continued to grow without words. Samuel had taught Naomi the names of the animals, the tools, and the plants around the ranch. She learned quickly, and in return, she showed Samuel ways of observing the land he had never noticed. She pointed out signs of water in the dry earth, tracks of wild animals, and even places where the soil was fertile enough to grow herbs and vegetables. Samuel was amazed. Naomi's knowledge, gathered from her life before the ranch, added new depth to his understanding of the land. He realized that her presence had not only helped her survive, but also enriched his own life. One morning, Samuel decided it was time for Naomi to ride on Daisy, his brown mare. She had watched him ride many times, always with curiosity in her eyes. He led the horse to her, steadying it while she climbed onto the back. At first, she was hesitant, gripping the reins tightly and looking nervous. Samuel walked beside her, guiding Daisy slowly along the familiar path. Naomi's fear gradually turned into delight as she felt the freedom of riding over the plains. Her laughter, light and musical, echoed across the fields. Samuel smiled, feeling a warmth in his chest that went beyond friendship. Life on the ranch continued with its daily struggles, but Samuel and Naomi found joy in the smallest moments. They worked together to repair fences after storms, gathered firewood, and tended to the garden. Naomi learned to cook simple meals, often surprising Samuel with her resourcefulness. She found ways to use herbs and vegetables to improve the taste of their food. Samuel watched her with quiet admiration. He had always lived a simple life, but Naomi's presence made each day feel richer, more meaningful. Yet their growing connection was not without tension. Samuel often thought about the outside world, about how others might see Naomi's presence on his ranch. The frontier was full of danger and prejudice. He knew some people would not understand why he had taken her in, why he protected her. Still, he refused to let fear dictate his actions. Naomi's safety and well-being were more important than the judgment of strangers. He continued to teach her how to remain cautious, how to move quietly if outsiders approached, and how to hide when necessary. Naomi, too, was learning the unspoken rules of their world. She had survived attacks, hunger, and long journeys alone. Now, under Samuel's protection, she began to trust him in ways she had not trusted anyone before. She would follow his instructions, watch his actions closely, and imitate his careful movements around the ranch. Sometimes, she would stop and look at Samuel with eyes full of understanding, as if to say, "I am ready. I can trust you." Those moments were small, yet powerful, marking the slow growth of a bond deeper than friendship. One afternoon, Samuel decided to show Naomi the nearby hills. They had never explored that far before, and he wanted her to see the view he had admired for years. They walked side by side, Naomi carefully following Samuel's lead. The hills rose gradually, dotted with rocks and sparse vegetation. When they reached the top, the view took Naomi's breath away. She gasped softly, pointing to the horizon where the plains stretched endlessly, dotted with rivers and trees. Samuel watched her, feeling a strange mixture of pride and affection. He had brought her here for safety, but he realized now that he was also showing her beauty, the world beyond hardship. During their walks, Samuel began to notice Naomi's curiosity about small things, the shape of clouds, the movement of birds, the way sunlight filtered through the trees. She would pause, touch the leaves, or crouch to examine flowers. Samuel admired this attention to detail. It reminded him that life on the frontier was not just about survival, but also about noticing the small, fleeting moments of wonder. Naomi's perspective made him see the world differently, more carefully, more fully. Their bond grew stronger during shared work. Naomi began to help Samuel with chores that required teamwork. She would lift heavy bundles of hay while he steadied the ladder. She would help guide cows into the pen while he opened the gate. Their movements were coordinated, almost instinctively. Samuel marveled at how naturally they complemented each other, as if they had always been meant to work together. It was not just skill or strength, it was trust, understanding, and mutual respect that made them a team. Evenings remained a time of quiet connection. They would sit by the fire, watching the flames dance and listening to the sounds of the night. Sometimes, Samuel would bring out his small flute and play a gentle tune. Naomi would hum along, her voice soft and steady, adding a gentle harmony to the music. Though they could not speak the same language, the music became a bridge between them. Each note carried emotions neither could express with words. Samuel felt that these moments were sacred, a time when the hardships of the frontier seemed distant and the bond between them felt unbreakable. As their trust deepened, Samuel began to learn more about Naomi's past. She would sometimes draw in the dirt with a stick, creating simple pictures that told stories of her journey. Samuel could see hints of her life before the ranch, the village she had come from, the hardships she endured, and the moments of fear and courage that defined her survival. He never pressed her to explain. Instead, he watched and listened with patience. He understood that her past was a part of her, and he respected her right to reveal it on her own terms. Naomi, in turn, began to observe Samuel closely. She noticed the care with which he approached the animals, the precision in his work, and the kindness in his gestures. She began to imitate some of his methods, learning the skills needed to manage the ranch more efficiently. Sometimes, she would surprise him with small innovations, a new way to gather firewood, a better method for feeding the animals, or a clever use of plants in the garden. Samuel admired her intelligence and adaptability. She was more than a companion. She was a partner who could think, plan, and act alongside him. Their lives were not without challenges. A sudden storm could wash away part of the fence or flood the fields. Coyotes prowled at night, and wild animals sometimes threatened the livestock. But Samuel and Naomi faced these dangers together. They learned to anticipate problems, support each other during crises, and celebrate victories, no matter how small. Each challenge they overcame strengthened their bond, creating a deep sense of reliance and partnership that words could not capture. One evening, as they sat quietly after finishing chores, Naomi reached out and touched Samuel's hand lightly. It was a small gesture, almost hesitant, but it spoke volumes. Samuel looked at her, understanding immediately. No words were needed. Trust, respect, and a deep connection had grown between them, quietly but powerfully. Samuel felt a warmth in his heart that was new and unexpected. Naomi was no longer just a rescued woman. She was someone he cared for deeply, someone whose presence had changed the course of his life. By the end of part 3, the bond between Samuel and Naomi had grown from trust into mutual respect and quiet affection. They had learned to work together, communicate without words, and face the challenges of the frontier as a united team. Their shared experiences, patience, and understanding had created a connection that was rare and profound. What had started as an act of mercy was now evolving into a relationship built on admiration, care, and the beginnings of love, a connection that neither could have anticipated when they first met in the dry creek bed. Life on the ranch had grown more settled, yet the world beyond the hills was never far from Samuel's thoughts. The frontier was full of dangers, and he knew that the presence of Naomi, A woman from a different tribe could bring trouble if outsiders learned of her. Even though they had built trust and affection, the risks of the outside world reminded Samuel that life on the frontier was fragile. Every day, he watched the horizon carefully, wary of strangers who might wander too close. Naomi, now stronger and more confident, shared his vigilance. She moved quietly when they were outside, her sharp eyes scanning the distance for any signs of danger. One morning, as Samuel tended to the cattle, he noticed smoke rising from the far side of the valley. His heart tightened. Travelers, hunters, or worse, hostile groups might be approaching. He quickly signaled to Naomi, who immediately understood. She dropped the basket of herbs she was carrying and followed Samuel to a hidden spot behind a cluster of trees. They crouched low, holding their breath as the figures moved closer. Samuel felt Naomi's hand brush against his, a small gesture of reassurance and shared fear. Though they could not speak, the bond between them in moments of danger was undeniable. As the group passed by, Samuel realized how vulnerable their situation could become. He knew that some settlers might not understand why he had taken Naomi in. Prejudices ran deep, and fear of native people often led to suspicion and hostility. But Samuel also knew that turning her away, leaving her to fend for herself, was not an option. She had survived so much already. He could not let fear dictate his actions. Naomi had come to trust him completely, and he was determined to keep her safe, no matter the risk. Over the next few days, Samuel took extra precautions. He reinforced the fences, checked the perimeter of the ranch, and prepared hiding places in case of sudden threats. Naomi watched carefully, learning from his cautious movements. She began to anticipate dangers herself, crouching quietly when strangers approached or remaining hidden during moments of risk. Samuel admired her attentiveness and the calm courage she displayed. Even after everything she had endured, Naomi remained strong and adaptable. Her resilience gave him hope and reassurance, even in the face of uncertainty. Despite the dangers, their relationship continued to grow. They spent long hours working together, sharing tasks that required patience and cooperation. Naomi helped Samuel with chores that required careful coordination, such as guiding the cattle through narrow gates or stacking firewood in unstable piles. Their movements were synchronized, almost instinctively, reflecting the deep trust that had developed between them. Samuel noticed how naturally Naomi adjusted to his pace and rhythm, making each task smoother and more efficient. In return, he learned to rely on her strength and judgment, understanding that they were stronger together than apart. Evenings became a cherished time for quiet reflection. After the day's work, Samuel and Naomi would sit outside the cabin, watching the sun sink below the horizon. The sky blazed with shades of red and orange, and the wind carried the faint scent of the fields. Sometimes Samuel would bring out his flute and play a gentle tune. Naomi would hum softly along, her voice blending with the music. These moments were a refuge from the dangers of the world, a time when they could simply exist together without fear or worry. It was during these evenings that their bond began to shift from trust and friendship into something deeper, a quiet affection that neither could fully express in words. However, life on the frontier never allowed them long periods of peace. One afternoon, Samuel spotted a group of men approaching from the distant hills. Their intentions were unclear, but Samuel could feel the tension in the air. He motioned for Naomi to stay close, and they both moved quietly toward the cabin, making preparations in case the men came too near. Naomi's eyes were alert, scanning every movement. Samuel felt a mixture of fear and pride. Fear for their safety and pride in the calm courage Naomi displayed. She had grown into someone who could face danger without hesitation, relying on skill and intuition rather than panic. The men paused near the edge of the property, and Samuel knew they were observing. He decided to approach them cautiously, leaving Naomi hidden behind the cabin. His voice was firm but respectful as he called out, identifying himself as the ranch owner. The men, after some questioning, revealed that they were hunters passing through, not intending harm. Samuel breathed a quiet sigh of relief and returned to Naomi, who had been waiting silently. Their eyes met, and in that moment, Samuel realized how much he relied on her presence, how intertwined their lives had become. They were not just companions, they were partners, facing the challenges of life together. As the days passed, Samuel noticed subtle changes in his feelings toward Naomi. He no longer saw her solely as someone he had rescued. He admired her courage, her intelligence, and her unwavering resilience. He found himself thinking of her when she was not near, worrying about her safety and feeling relief when she smiled. Naomi, too, seemed to sense the growing depth of their connection. She would linger near him during work, glance at him with a quiet warmth, and occasionally reach out for reassurance. Their bond was no longer limited to survival. It was becoming something personal, intimate, and undeniable. Despite the growing affection, Samuel knew that the world beyond the ranch could threaten their fragile peace. Rumors of tension between settlers and native tribes were common, and he was acutely aware that Naomi's presence could draw unwanted attention. He decided to prepare for any challenges they might face, teaching her how to remain cautious, move quietly, and anticipate threats. Naomi absorbed his lessons quickly, demonstrating intelligence and skill that impressed Samuel every day. He realized that their connection was built not just on trust and care, but on mutual respect for each other's strengths and abilities. One evening, a sudden storm approached, dark clouds rolling across the plains with fierce winds and distant thunder. Samuel and Naomi hurried to secure the animals and the cabin. They worked together seamlessly, communicating through gestures and quick glances. Naomi carried water to reinforce the barn, while Samuel secured the gates. The storm raged through the night, shaking the cabin and battering the land, but Samuel and Naomi faced it together. When dawn broke, the damage was minor, thanks to their teamwork. They looked at each other, exhausted but triumphant, and shared a quiet smile. These shared challenges strengthened their bond, creating a sense of partnership that went beyond words. In the calm moments after the storm, Samuel and Naomi began to explore more of the land together. Naomi's confidence had grown, and she moved with a quiet assurance. She pointed out places where wild herbs could be found, safe spots for water collection, and areas where animals might graze. Samuel listened carefully, impressed by her knowledge and insight. He realized that she was not only strong and capable but also wise and thoughtful. Her presence had transformed the ranch into a more efficient and vibrant place. Together, they were building a life that neither had anticipated, shaped by trust, courage, and growing affection. Despite the growing closeness, Samuel remained aware of the dangers beyond the ranch. One afternoon, travelers passed nearby, and Samuel had to hide Naomi quickly to avoid questions or suspicion. Naomi crouched behind a stack of firewood, her eyes wide but calm. Samuel moved with careful precision, ensuring their safety. The travelers passed without incident, but Samuel knew that such encounters could happen again. He resolved to remain vigilant, teaching Naomi to anticipate dangers and respond calmly. Their shared experiences of risk and survival deepened their connection, creating a bond forged in both trust and mutual protection. By the end of Part 4, Samuel and Naomi had faced external threats, fear, and the constant risk of prejudice, yet their bond had only grown stronger. They had learned to rely on each other completely, to anticipate challenges together, and to face danger with courage. What had begun as an act of kindness had evolved into a profound connection built on trust, respect, and the first stirrings of love. They had discovered that life on the frontier was not only about survival, but also about the strength of human connection and the courage to protect what mattered most. The months passed slowly but steadily on the ranch. Samuel and Naomi had grown closer with each day, their lives intertwined by work, trust, and the shared experiences of survival. The harsh land, which once seemed empty and lonely, had become a place of life, hope, and quiet joy. Naomi had become strong, capable, and confident. She moved through the ranch with a grace and skill that amazed Samuel every day. Yet, beyond the fences and hills, the world remained unpredictable. Samuel knew that their happiness could be challenged at any moment, but he had made a decision deep in his heart. He would not let fear or prejudice separate them. One morning, as the sun rose over the plains, Samuel and Naomi worked together in the garden. Naomi handed him freshly gathered vegetables, her hands steady and sure. Samuel smiled at her, feeling a warmth he had never known before. In that simple exchange, he realized how much he valued her presence, not just for her help around the ranch, but for the person she was, strong, intelligent, and kind. Naomi glanced at him, and their eyes met for a long moment. No words were spoken, but each understood the quiet depth of feeling growing between them. Life on the ranch had taught them the importance of small joys. They celebrated minor victories, harvested crops, a new calf, or a repaired fence. Each achievement was shared and appreciated. Naomi had begun to laugh more freely, her voice carrying across the fields. Samuel found himself smiling more, feeling lighter, and more alive than he had in years. The bond between them was no longer just about survival or trust. It had grown into something personal and profound. Samuel began to feel the stirrings of love, a feeling he had long thought impossible in his solitary life. Naomi, too, seemed to feel the same, showing care, attention, and affection in ways both subtle and powerful. Despite the peace they had built, Samuel remained aware of the dangers beyond the ranch. One evening, travelers passed nearby, and Samuel took precautions to protect Naomi. He had taught her how to move quietly, how to hide, and how to respond calmly to threats. Naomi followed his instructions without hesitation, demonstrating the skills and awareness she had developed under his guidance. Samuel watched her with pride. She was no longer a woman in need of protection. She was his equal, a partner capable of facing life's challenges alongside him. This realization deepened his respect and love for her even further. As winter approached, Samuel and Naomi prepared for the colder months. They repaired the cabin, gathered firewood, and stored food carefully. Naomi had learned to cook simple but nourishing meals, and the warmth of their fire became a gathering place where they could share stories through gestures and drawings. Though they could not speak the same language fluently, their communication had grown richer. Each glance, touch, and smile carried meaning. They had discovered that love could be expressed without words through trust, care, and shared experiences. One night after the chores were done, Samuel and Naomi sat outside, watching the stars appear one by one in the dark sky. The plains stretched endlessly before them, quiet and still. Samuel felt a deep sense of peace as he looked at Naomi. She had come to him alone, weak and hungry, and now she was strong, confident, and full of life. He realized that she had changed his world completely. Naomi turned her gaze to him, her eyes reflecting the starlight. In that silent moment, Samuel understood that their bond had grown into something neither of them could deny. He reached out and held her hand gently, and she did not pull away. Their fingers intertwined naturally, a simple but profound acknowledgement of the feelings that had been growing between them. The coming weeks were filled with shared work, laughter, and quiet moments of affection. Samuel and Naomi continued to face challenges, from harsh weather to minor accidents on the ranch. But each challenge only strengthened their partnership. Naomi's strength and intelligence complemented Samuel's experience and skill. Together, they became a team that could withstand both the hardships of the land and the uncertainties of the world beyond. Their connection was no longer just about survival. It was about choosing each other every day, about building a life together despite the obstacles. As spring arrived, bringing new life to the plains, Samuel made a decision. He wanted to ensure that Naomi knew she was valued not just as a companion, but as someone he would spend his life with. One afternoon, after a long day of work, Samuel led Naomi to the top of the hill overlooking the ranch. The view was breathtaking, with the fields stretching out under the golden sunlight. He spoke softly, using the few words she could understand, and combined them with gestures to convey his meaning. Naomi listened attentively, her eyes searching his. When he finished, he reached for her hand again, a silent promise of commitment and partnership. Naomi's eyes filled with understanding, gratitude, and a quiet joy. The decision to commit to each other was not taken lightly. Samuel knew that life on the frontier would continue to be difficult, and Naomi was aware of the challenges they might face as a couple. Yet both were willing to take the risk, knowing that their bond was stronger than fear. They had learned to face danger together, to support each other, and to find joy in even the smallest moments. Choosing to be together was a natural step, a way to honor the trust, respect, and affection they had built over months of shared experiences. After their commitment, life on the ranch became even more meaningful. Samuel and Naomi worked together to improve the land, plant new crops, and care for the animals. They celebrated milestones and simple joys, from the birth of a calf to the first harvest of the season. Naomi's laughter became a constant presence, and Samuel's heart was lighter and fuller than it had been in years. Their shared life was built on cooperation, understanding, and the deep love that had grown quietly over time. Evenings remained their favorite part of the day. They would sit by the fire, sharing warmth and comfort, sometimes humming together or simply enjoying the quiet of the plains. Samuel often reflected on how much Naomi had changed his life. She had come to him alone, hungry and fearful, and now she was his partner, equal in strength, wisdom, and spirit. Naomi had found safety and care in Samuel, but she had also brought life, joy, and purpose to his days. Together, they had created a home that was both safe and full of love. The seasons continued to change, and Samuel and Naomi faced new challenges together. Storms, harsh winds, and difficult work tested their skills and patience. Yet each obstacle only strengthened their connection. They had learned to rely on each other completely, to face life's uncertainties with courage, and to celebrate victories, no matter how small. Their partnership was no longer just about survival. It was about building a life together, grounded in trust, respect, and love. By the end of Part 5, Samuel and Naomi had fully committed to each other. What had begun as an act of kindness had grown into a profound partnership and love. They had faced danger, fear, and prejudice, yet their bond had only grown stronger. Life on the frontier was still challenging, but together, they were unstoppable. Samuel had found not only a companion but a life partner, and Naomi had found safety, care, and a home where she was valued and loved. Their story was a testament to the power of trust, courage, and the quiet, enduring strength of love. Samuel and Naomi's days continued with shared work, laughter, and quiet companionship. They had learned that true partnership was about more than survival. It was about understanding, respect, and choosing each other every day. Together they faced the frontier with confidence, hope, and the knowledge that, no matter what challenges lay ahead, they would face them side by side. The ranch, once a lonely place, had become a home filled with life, warmth, and the enduring bond of two people who had found love in the most unlikely of circumstances.